You're listening to the podcast of Friendly Fire with Ryan Doyle and John Downs from News Talk 1010.
You're listening to In-Depth Radio here on News Talk 1010. Our guest tonight, a very interesting and controversial man. His name is Geert. His book is called Marked for Death. You know the name because he has been an outspoken critic, both of radical Islam and the idea and concept of multiculturalism. And we're happy to welcome him to the show this evening. Good evening to you.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on your show.
The book Marked for Death, it is both a personal story about what you've had to go through for being so outspoken, and a story about your battle and willingness to be outspoken against things like radical Islam. Yet you maintain the idea that free speech is no longer a given in this world.
No, unfortunately, that is very true. I believe that nothing really is more powerful than the truth. Free people should never be silenced or fall victim to violent intimidation. And, I'm one of those persons that speak out against the Islamization of our societies. And the result is that I have indeed been threatened with death. I have been banned from countries. And yes, I have been put on trial, even in my home country, the Netherlands. After 3 years, a terrible ordeal, I was acquitted of all charges, but still, the freedom of speech is going in the wrong direction because of the Islamization of our societies.
What in your mind is the truth about Islam?
Well, let me first say that I have nothing against people. I have nothing against Muslims. I acknowledge the fact that the majority of the Muslims in our Western world are law-abiding people. It would be ridiculous even to suggest that the majority of the Muslims are terrorists or violent. But there is, however, only one Islam. There is no moderate Islam or a radical Islam. There is only one Islam, and this is the Islam that comes from the Holy Book, the Quran, and from the life of Muhammad. And I believe that Islam is more a totalitarian ideology, a violent ideology that wants to dominate, what the word Islam means itself, domination, that wants to dominate any society. And, you see that almost every country in the world where the Islamic ideology or religion, if you want, is dominant, that it goes against the freedom of speech, the freedom of women, the freedom of speech of homosexuals, of Christians. Look at the people who are Christians, how they are treated in the Arab world. So I believe we should treat Islam as such. And the biggest disease in Europe, and maybe even in America as well, is, as I see it, called cultural relativism. Is the fact that we politicians fool the people, often liberal and leftish politicians, by the nonsense that all cultures are equal. And I believe that our culture, based on Christianity, on Judaism, on humanism, is far better and superior to the Islamic culture. So yes, I have no problem with Muslims, but I believe that the Islamization of our societies is the worst thing that can happen to our countries, our rule of law, and our freedom entirely.
I think when you start to speak about superiority of religion, you start to, obviously make people who would be considered moderate Muslims feel uneasy. What would your message be to them? Are they not equal with the moderate Christians or moderate Jews?
Well, all people are equal for me. So I have, once again, nothing against people. Muslims who consider themselves moderate, I acknowledge the fact that the majority of them are moderate, and I have no problem with them. If people in our societies obey by our laws, our rule of law, our values, and our constitution, they are, of course, equal as anybody else, and they are welcome to stay. But if they are not, and look what is happening in Europe today, and the point of my book, Marked for Death, exactly is that, please, America, learn from our mistakes. America is the beacon of freedom in the Western world. And, what is happening in Europe today can very easily happen to America tomorrow. And we see in Europe that we have states within a state, that we have an Islamization that is go to cities in the Netherlands, in France, in the United Kingdom, in Germany, and Denmark, and you will see what the Islamization, what it brought us to. I mean, even a lot of people in America don't know that. Even in United Kingdom today, there are 60 Sharia courts active where the testimony of a woman is worth half of that of a man. The crime, unfortunately, because of the mass immigration, has risen enormously. If you look, one example again about a young Moroccan youth in the Netherlands, where we have a lot of immigration from Morocco, more than half, 60% of them, have been detained by the police at least once. You see Sharia banking. You see the veil, the burqa. You see it in so many places in Europe today. And once again, if you speak out against Islam, you are threatened with death. You are, as I experienced, banned from countries. You are taken to court, which, of course, all would not have happened if somebody would criticize Christianity or Judaism.
Our guest tonight, Dutch politician Geert Wilders. His book is called Marked for Death. Obviously, immigration is a big issue here. It's sort of an impediment that would prevent or allow people to come back and forth from your country, in your view. Dutch society in the Netherlands, it's been known as a very multicultural society. So why push for a moratorium on immigration from non-Western countries?
Well, indeed, we invented it in the 60s and the 70s when cheap labor was needed. We invited a lot of people from Northern Africa, more especially, to come to the Netherlands and to other Western European countries. But the intention at that time was to make it temporarily. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and we have really had mass immigration from Northern Africa and other Arab and Islamic countries. And this is changing our societies entirely. This is changing it, unfortunately, for the worse and not for the better. So I believe that we should... I'm still a positive person. I believe it's 5 minutes to 12 in our Western societies because the Islamization went too far. But we should, defend freedom of speech. We can learn from America. We should introduce in Europe, in Australia and Canada, we should introduce some kind of First Amendment that people are not being taken to court. Either way they think about religion or ideology. We should reject cultural relativism. And we should, maybe the most important thing, see Islam for what it is. It's not to be compared with Christianity of ideology. It's to be compared with other totalitarian ideologies like communism or fascism. And let me give you one example. If people who are Muslim, if they want to leave Islam, the penalty on that, on those renegades and apostates, is death. And this is something that is not happening in other religions like Christianity or Judaism, but was happening, the lack of freedom and the penalty of death if you want to leave the ideology. That was what we saw happening in the last century in fascist Germany or communist Russia. So we should see Islam for what it is, have nothing against the people. On the contrary, we should stimulate the people, the Muslims, to choose for freedom and to go for to leave Islam, and at the same time not grant Islam all the rights that we give to other religions. I'm very much against the building of more mosques in our free Western world. I'm against having Islamic schools where young children are being brought up with an ideology of hate. If we want them to integrate and assimilate in our society, it's the worst thing we could do.
Our guest tonight is Geert Wilders, Dutch politician and controversial man, to say the very least. His book is called Marked for Death. When we come back, why don't moderate Muslims get angry about radical Muslims? We'll talk about that with him next as Friendly Fire continues. Ryan Doyle, John Downs, In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010. You're listening to Friendly Fire, Ryan Doyle, John Downs, here on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010. Our guest tonight is Dutch politician Geert Wilders. His book is called Marked for Death. When we talk about moderate Muslims, why is it that they don't speak out enough? Why is it that they don't ring the alarm and speak out against radical Islam? I'm a Catholic, for example. If there were a sect of Catholicism that was ruining the name of my religion, I would be screaming from the mountaintops that this was wrong, that this is not who I am. But we don't see it as much as we would in religions like, say, Catholicism or Judaism.
Well, that's a very good question. I also write about that subject specifically in my book, Marked for Death, and let me give you two important reasons. First is that many Muslims believe that the Quran is the literal word of Allah, the word of God, which is a difference from Christianity and from Judaism. They believe that the original is still now on a golden table in heaven and that it cannot be interpreted in any possible way. Second is because they are afraid and intimidated. I already gave you the example of apostates, where even within families the penalty is death. And people are afraid to speak out. I'm not a Muslim. If I speak out against Islam, and I do, I am threatened to death and killed and taken to court. imagine people who are Islamic, what their faith will be. So people are afraid, are intimidated, and this is a very bad thing, because indeed it would be so good if Muslims would speak out against 9/11. For instance, at 9/11 in cities in the Netherlands, Muslims were cheering about the terrible ordeal that happened to America at that time. So there is not enough room, enough guts for people to speak out, because they are either afraid or they believe that what is written in the Quran cannot be changed, will not be changed, and is the word of Allah, and therefore cannot be interpreted in a different or more moderate way.
Do you think or predict we'll get to a point where Islam could move or evolve into a more moderate religion? It's obviously, we know religion's sort of set in stone, obviously, but there are people out there who follow the religion who want to see it progress. With the Catholic faith, for example, there are people out there who want women to become priests. So is there room for advancement in religion? Do you see a time when Islam could be more moderate?
No, I don't think. I think people and Muslims can be moderate. The majority are already, and I think we should invest in getting more Muslims even more moderate, but not Islam. And maybe the best example is what happened in Egypt after President Mubarak was thrown out of office in Egypt. We saw that there was a poll, and the poll said that 65% of the Egyptians were in favor of democracy, which was, of course, very positive. And at the same time, in the same week, actually, it said in the same poll that 86% of the Muslims of Egypt were still in favor of killing apostates. So I believe that as long as the Islamic culture is dominant in any country, unfortunately it will not change. There will not be an Arab Spring as long as Islam is dominant. And once again, the reason is that Muslims believe, that's why they don't criticize your former question, they don't dare to criticize Islam. Either they don't dare or they believe that it's the word of Allah. So I believe there never will be a moderate Islam. There is only one Islam, and that is the Islam of the Quran and of Muhammad. However, people are moderate, and we can help people by either leaving Islam or by supporting them if they are not taking the tough stand as some of them do.
Talking to Dutch politician Geert Wilders. When we come back, what the fatwa? You're listening to In-Depth Radio News Talk 1010.
Geert Wilders is our guest tonight. His book is called Marked for Death. Going through your book, it's interesting to me because you think of Salman Rushdie and the fatwa that was the fatwas that were put up against him for speaking out and writing satanic verses. I think very much in the same line. Going through your book, when you look at it, you have to wonder if you weren't onto something, if your points were baseless, there would be no death threat against you.
It wouldn't. And I wrote an article in a Dutch newspaper once that I said that if I would have made a movie like I did, a short documentary about Islam, if I would have done that about Christianity, I'm not planning to do so, but imagine, for argument's sake, that I would have done so. If I would have written a book about Christianity and being critical towards Christianity, the Dutch troops in Afghanistan, the Dutch military, would not have been threatened. I would not have had a fatwa. I would not have been taken to court. All those things would not have happened. So exactly the way extreme Muslims react towards people who are critical about Islam exactly proves my point. And once again, I'm not the only one. You mentioned Salman Rushdie, but look at Kurt Westergaard or Lars Vilks, the cartoonists from Scandinavia, or Jan Hirsi Ali or others. Everybody who dares to speak the truth about Islam gets the same terrible ordeal, and this exactly proves the point that Islam is not capable of criticism, wants to dominate, and anything that is kafir, as they call, that is non-Muslim, will pay the price. And let me tell you, Christians and Jews were and will be the first one to pay the price in any society where Islam becomes dominant. If we see even today how the Christian Copts in Egypt or the Christians in Syria or in Iraq, how they are treated, it's the worst thing that can happen to anyone, and this is also what will happen in our societies if Islam becomes more dominant.
Do you think that support for your ideology might be limited because it appears, or the tone seems rather extreme?
Well, I don't think it's extreme. And the proof is that 2 years ago, out of nothing, my party, the Party for Freedom, became, with this political agenda, the third largest party in the Netherlands. We have 10 parties in our parliament. We became number 3 out of nothing. And we supported a minority government. We have elections now again in September because the government collapsed. But there is an enormous, and this is why I'm still positive, there is an enormous amount of support by the Vox Populi, by the normal people who are not taking granted anymore that they are being fooled by political correct politicians who are really ignoring and shoving under the carpet all the problems that they face every day again because of the Islamization. And the same happened in Denmark with a party that became very large. So there is room for a change for the better. And my book, Marked for Death, my message is that to our friends in America, that please don't make the mistakes that we made in Europe. What happened in Europe will happen in America as well. And learn from our mistakes, because once again, America is on the verge of losing a European ally because of the Islamization, and that should not happen, and America should stay the beacon of freedom in the Western world as well.
Our guest tonight, Geert Wilders, Dutch politician. His book is called Marked for Death. Now, there are politicians in the UK, for example, Germany, who refuse to address this issue, which could create other parties that are more extreme, that are plain racist, that could possibly fill the vacuum.
Well, that is exactly a very enormous problem in Europe today, because existing parties are ignoring the problem, or are just talking about it, but not really meaning if they address the problem, because they are afraid of political competition, because they ignore the fact you see other parties emerge that might not be so democratic. I mean, in Denmark, and I believe my own party, we are the biggest friend of the State of Israel. We are not racist or extremist at all. If we would, in the Netherlands, we would have 1% of the vote and not 16% of the vote, because we are still a very moderate country. But you're right, in other countries like United Kingdom, you have the British National Party or another, which are blunt racist and extremist parties. And you should expect that the other parties that are already there for decades, maybe even longer, should fill the gap and should talk the talk and should really deal with this problem. We saw last year, in a month's time, that the president of France, at that time still Mr. Sarkozy, the chancellor of Germany, Frau Merkel, and David Cameron, the prime minister of United Kingdom, said in 3 weeks' time that they believed that the multicultural society was a failure. And this was very positive, but they didn't act on it. And why didn't they do it? Because they didn't mean it. They just wanted to get voters and not parties like mine or others to emerge. But the people are not fooled. You see in many countries in Europe, once again, that, go to Europe. I hope that your listeners who did not go to Europe yet will do it and see for themselves how Europe has changed in the last decades. And this is something that, once again, people don't feel at home. People often feel as if they are living in an Arab country with a lot of crime, other values. Women are being beaten up. We have genital mutilation. We have forced marriages. We have honor killings. I mean, they are almost on a daily basis in Europe, and this is what we should prevent happening.
You're 48 years old, yes?
Yeah.
Your book is called Marked for Death. This may be a strange question, but with the messages that you put out and obviously the intense security that you have to live under, how long do you expect to live?
Well, I hope as long as possible as anybody else, of course. But it has not been easy. I have been now on the 24-hour protection for 8 years. I live with my wife in prison cells, in army barracks, just for security reasons. Now I live in a safe house, which is almost as safe as a bank. But there is still always this threat, of course. But, I believe, how tough it may be, that I will continue. I will not moderate my voice, because if I would, and I'm only using, once again, democratical, non-violent means as a politician in a democratic country, that if I would moderate my voice or stop talking about the truth, then the people who use non-democratic means, who use violence, who threaten with fatwas, they should win. They would win, and they should never be able to win.
Really interesting conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Sure.
Geert Wilders. The book is called Marked for Death. He is a Dutch politician, very outspoken, as you just heard. And John, a very interesting conversation, and one I know a lot of people I can see already want to interact with us on. So we'll continue this conversation without Mr. Wilders, but talk a little bit about what he had to say.
I got more to say. I'm sure you do, too.
I do.
But if anyone else wants in, 71010, you can text us. You can give us a call, Star Talk, star 8255. You can email us, friendlyfire@astral.com. Ryan Doyle, John Downs, you're listening to In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010.
You can check out Friendly Fire with Ryan Doyle and John Downs, live weeknights 7 till 10 on newstalk1010.com.
The freedom of speech is going in the wrong direction because of the Islamization of our societies.
That is Geert Wilders, controversial author, no question. You've heard what he had to say, and now you'll get a say. You can text us at 71010, give us a call at Star Talk, star 8255. You can email the show, friendlyfire@astral.com. His book is called Marked for Death. John and I just sat down with him for a half an hour to talk to him about his ideas, his philosophy. In no way, because we sit down and do an interview with somebody, though, does that mean we support what he has to say. However, there are elements that I happen to agree with. I don't know about you, John, but what I find disturbing, and let's just address this right out of the chute. During the interview, you saw the phones start to light up.
Yeah.
And immediately people started to call. And the first thing out of most people's mouths were, and this is according to our technical guy, and I don't have any reason to disbelieve him, he's an honest guy, were, why are you allowing this man on the air? How can he say such things? Why should he be allowed to speak on the air? So almost right away, proving his point that free speech, in its truest sense, has no real place when you start to speak even mildly. The show hadn't even started yet, mildly against a particular religion.
Yeah, I got to say I was surprised myself to see the text messages, 71010. We got emails to friendlyfire@astral.com, and I guess because I'm familiar with him, so are you. We've known about his efforts for the last few years. The issue that I took, or the part of the conversation that I took issue with, was his comments that he has problems with Islam but not Muslims. That this is about the Quran and not Muslims. And I have to disagree with him there because no religion that currently exists in a vacuum. Religions are people. Religion's is about the people who follow it. So I don't believe that you can't take a religion which is, I guess, relatively new compared to Judaism or Christianity, slightly or newer, I guess you could say, and expect it to evolve into a more moderate sense. Is it okay where it is now? That's where I agree with him. I don't think it is. I think it is compared to most other religions, one of the most extreme, and just I happen to see this.
And again, it's one of those things. Well, bring that up because there's other things that I've got on my list, but this just came
across. Lady Gaga, who you all know, had to cancel her sold-out show in Indonesia following protests by Islamic hardliners. Apparently, even though it's technically a secular country with a long history of religious tolerance, a small extremist fringe has become more vocal in recent years. Some in the country threatened to use physical force to prevent her from stepping off the plane. She does her sexy moves and stuff like that, and people don't like the message.
Well, and some of the other things that are day-to-day that Mr. Wilders talked about on the show just a few minutes ago, Sharia law, genital mutilation, honor killings, women being treated as second-class citizens, extremists within the religion, and again, extremists within the religion using terrorism to get their point across. We would be burying our head in the sand if we didn't have discussions about this. And I'll be honest with you, if you want to have the other side of the discussion, if an Islamic extremist wants to come on this show and sit with the two of us and have a conversation to the counterpoints as to why they feel the need to take their religion to the nth degree, then I'd be happy to have that person on to explain it as well, because free speech, in my mind, should be just that.
Well, and that's the thing, is there is, when it comes to an Islamic extremist, there's no such thing as free speech. He does make some good points, although I have been looking them up, and he does make pretty blanket statements about, for instance, there is no converting from Islam. The punishment is death. Yes, that has long been an interpretation. There are several current moderate Islamic scholars who would disagree with that. And what I find interesting is if you compare the Quran to the Bible is medieval in a lot of what it preaches, in a sense. You look back to Leviticus, Old Testament, where we don't behave that way anymore. And, I'd like to think there's good reason for that. However, it is a religious text. So you can be critical of it for being just that. But in Christianity and Catholicism, it is about the people.
Yeah, and just to be completely clear, for those who decided to call in, and there are a lot of calls right now, we will get to everybody, I promise you that. But just let us take the time to say this, because I think it's important. If somebody writes a book that is critical of Catholicism, and not necessarily critical of the followers of Catholicism, I would have that person on the show too.
Oh, for sure.
I would have no problem with that, and that is my faith. And if my faith gets put under the microscope and criticized and maybe takes a few body punches, I'm fine with talking to that person who's willing to do that. Because I think that conversation is the only way we as human beings can understand and adapt to one another. It's the only way we can do it. If we all sit in our own little, secluded areas in groups, we're never going to get anything accomplished. Just not going to do it. Not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree.
Sergio, go ahead.
Hi, guys. Well, for one, I would just say that I actually have no problem in having somebody like this guy on the show, because it actually gives everybody else to voice in and clear any translucencies that are currently out there at this point. Now, that being said, there were a couple things that he did say that were correct, but there were also things in there that were not right. Like, for example, talking about, let's just say, for the women, right? Well, I'll take a step back here. John, as you pointed out, religion is portrayed by the people. Correct me if I'm wrong. That was
essentially the people are what are at the core, the heart of religion, any religion.
Absolutely. Okay. Now, that being said, you have different categories of people out there. Now, these people that we call the extremists, let me just put it out there, I am a Muslim. Now, these people that are called the extremists, I think there's more of a problem of being uneducated and taking irrational steps, which is what's being portrayed out there. For me, for example, I would not threaten this guy on his life. Why? Because he has a certain way of living. Why wouldn't I do that? Because that's what my religion teaches me. Now, if you go to the rural areas, if you go to villages back home, let it be, I'm sorry, but let's just say Saudi Arabia. Many people out here think that's a paramount of
Sergio, I would challenge you on that, though. I don't think you have to go to remote villages. In this country, we have had honor killings in the name of your religion, and the argument being made by Mr. Valders tonight, and we'll come back in just a second and continue this conversation. But the argument being made by Mr. Valders tonight is that there are many extreme elements within the religion itself. He's not attacking the people. I think it's very important to separate the two. But there are many extreme elements within the religion of Islam, and I've named a few of them tonight. Some that we do not accept in the Western world.
He is not preaching violence against the people. However, I disagree with you. This is an attack against the people, because the people are the ones who carry out the religion, who are a part of it. So religion cannot exist in itself.
That comes with different degrees, John. We'll come back. Star Talk, star 8255. You can text us at 71010. You give us a call at Star Talk, star 8255. Ryan Doyle, John Downs, In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010.
And I believe that our culture, based on Christianity, on Judaism, on humanism, is far better and superior to the Islamic cultures.
In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010, Ryan Doyle, John Downs here on Friendly Fire. That is Geert Wilders, controversial politician from the Netherlands, who's written a book called Marked for Death. He was our guest this evening between 8 and 8:30. And I will say, John, that's probably the one point that I disagree with him on, this idea of superiority. I think that if you start speaking in terms of superiority, your message tends to get lost. I think that if you look at all religion as even and try to work against the extreme elements of whatever religion, you're doing yourself a bigger favor.
I disagree with you on that, and I'll give you an example why. I saw, when I was in grade 11, I saw a girl who was, some may say flaky. She was very interesting. She was into crystals, healing, all that kind of stuff, and she was a vegetarian. And I had this discussion with her about her vegetarianism, her attitude towards meat, and her attitude towards people who actually are not vegetarians. And I said to her, you clearly must think that I'm wrong, because you do what you think is right. And if you do what you think's right, I'm doing the opposite is wrong.
Yeah.
And she kept insisting, no, you can do what you want. You can do. Finally, I managed to convince her that she believed her perspective was superior to mine. And she's completely entitled to believe that.
And this is what I don't like. And I would probably change the word that Mr. Velders is using. If you think your religion, if you believe in your religion, obviously you think it is correct and the other religions are wrong. But I would never say that the religion that I subscribe to is superior to another. I think if the word superior gives off an impression of being smug.
Yeah, it does. Well, if you want to be accurate, though, if you think your religion is right and mine is wrong, you think your religion is superior to mine.
Ali, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I hope you guys don't cut me off mid-sentence or cut me off anywhere near while I'm making my points. But I just want to make a few points about all the things
just stick to one. We've got a lot of people to get to, so I just don't want to be rude and cut you off for that reason.
Okay, but the first thing I want to say is you gave Mr. Wilders an uncontested platform. You did not challenge him on anything he said, and I think that that was not a way to conduct an interview. First of all, this is the individual who was the prime influence on Anders Breivik, the individual that carried out the 7/7 massacres in Norway. You did not contest him on that point at all.
Well, that is not his doing.
Well, exactly. See, now you're getting into my point. So Islam, what the text of the Quran says, what Islam says, that is not the doing of Islam. People are to be responsible for their own actions. And to simply say that, honor killings is an Islamic thing, honor killings is not Islamic. Honor killings is a cultural thing which happens, unfortunately, in Central Asia. You don't see Muslims in Malaysia or Indonesia or Turkey or in Albania practicing honor killings. Why? Because they're not located in that region. But you will find Jews, Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, all religions in that particular region of Central Asia practicing honor killings.
Okay, let me tell you why you're wrong right now. I'm sorry, we can't get to number two, but I'll tell you why we're wrong for number one.
I'm not wrong. I'll tell you why I'm not wrong.
Ali, you didn't want to be cut off. You're going to have a conversation. Ali,
I gave you a perfect example.
Ali,
you will see hundreds of honor killings.
Ali, if you want to have a conversation, I'll give you one more chance.
The Sephardic Jews.
Okay.
All right. I gave you an example. We talked about Lady Gaga threatening to... she is threatened with physical violence if she tries to get off the plane in Indonesia. Very good text, I think. Very well sums it up. 7-10-10. We've got a text from someone saying, if I threaten someone with violence or death, I am arrested, tried, and jailed, no matter what the reason. I think we have to have some kind of collection or some kind of group, conference of religious leaders from around the world who have to come down to that and decide whether or not we can all agree on that tenet, that it is not permissible, ethical, or legal to ever threaten anyone with violence or death.
Yeah, and for the record, when you hear, they don't do it in this part of the world, they do it in this part of the world. Okay, I'll give you that point. But there are other parts of what I've listed here tonight, and if Ali would have been patient enough to not cut us off, in a sense, I would have loved to have had that conversation with him, because there are a lot of other things, such as Sharia law, such as genital mutilation, things that have been brought up in the past that were worthwhile talking about. And we'll come back and we'll continue the conversation, John.
Star Talk, star 825571010 if you want to text. Email us, friendlyfire@astral.com. Ryan Doyle, John Downs, In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010.
After 9 o'clock, is a job just a job? Are there any such things as bad jobs? We'll talk about the finance minister's controversial comments. But right now we're talking about the comments that were made by Geert Wilders, who was our guest between 8 and 8:30 tonight. Of course, that has caused a lot of controversy. He is not a fan of multiculturalism. You heard that on the show. You also heard that he's not a fan of the religion of Islam, which is an important distinction to make. There's a couple people that have called in, and I don't know what their agenda is, because not every one of them has decided to hang on long enough to tell us. They've decided to hang up instead. But let me be very clear, and John, I'd love your reaction to it as well. To say that we didn't challenge him, we asked critical questions of him. Just because we didn't get all up in his face and decide to slap him around and raise our voices doesn't mean that he wasn't challenged or that critical questions weren't asked of him. But I'm not going to ask questions that are based on somebody else's agenda. I'm going to ask questions that I find to be interesting and that will challenge in a critical way, the points that the guest is making. And I think we did that tonight.
I think what we were trying to do was have him expand on some of the ideas he's put forward in the past. Ideas, exactly. Philosophies, ideas. And then we can, challenge them from this point on. Our approach was not to go into this interview trying to beat him. That's not what this is about. And the thing is, by doing that, we could actually analyze each point he makes. For instance, I don't agree that multiculturalism can't work. I disagree with him on that one. However, this idea that we have to reject the text but not the people seems ridiculous to me, because if you're going to make the argument that Christianity or Catholicism are religions of peace, look at the text that came from. There are some pretty violent suggestions in the Old Testament especially. So to suggest that a religion cannot evolve from its text, I don't believe that at all.
I would tend to agree with him that multiculturalism has proven to be a failure in many parts of the world, and I think that we go too far sometimes to accommodate other people's religion. And I don't think that that's hate speech to say that, and I'm not even particularly picking on one religion here or one culture. However, I do think that there are times where we bend over backwards to accommodate certain religions, and I think that that's got to be called into question every now and then. But we can still have a mature and open-minded discussion about it without everybody yelling and finger-pointing. Because otherwise, I'm going to tell you right now, folks, you want to continue the yelling and the finger-pointing, you're going to go back a couple hundred more centuries as opposed to advancing going forward.
Yeah, I think the only way people are going to get offended is if you try to take away someone's dignity, you try to harm,
right? You
promote harm against someone, or you promote death against someone.
And none of that was done today.
None of that was done, and I think, this is a discussion that could easily be had, and I think there's a consensus that many people of many different faiths or non-faiths, a lot of stuff we could all agree on.
9:45 tonight, Joe Warmington will be here to give us a preview of the late shift. Also after 9:30, how private is your work computer? What are you guys doing on there anyway? And we'll talk a little bit about Jim Flaherty's comments. There's no such thing as a bad job, huh, Jim? We'll find out. Next is Friendly Fire with Ryan Doyle, John Downs, continues on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010.
Thanks for listening to the Friendly Fire podcast. Catch Friendly Fire with Ryan Doyle and John Downs, weeknights 7 till 10 on News Talk 1010.